It delays him enough that when he arrives, the little girl is already dead, and then he raises her from the dead. Kind of a big day. Kind of a big deal. And the reality is that in following Christ, we need to understand as we look at this that these are things he does. That while he was on earth, he did miracles. And most frequently, the miracles that he did were miracles of healing or miracles where we see on a few occasions, not many, but a few occasions, at least 3, where Jesus raises someone from the dead. Now what this tells us is not that Jesus necessarily heals people automatically. What this tells us is not that those 3 people were super special and everybody else wasn't worth it. What this shows us is that Jesus has power over sickness and over death. That he has the ability to say, no, the way the normal world works, the way the normal order of things are, where when you get sick, you get sicker, and when you die, you stay dead, that he, as God the Son, as God having come down among us, has the authority and the power to reverse the natural order of things, to make things happen in a way that they would not normally occur, to bring about a miracle. The problem is that even then, even in that time, Jesus healed the sick, but not all the sick. That we see times where he comes and he's preaching to the multitude and he heals many, but then he gets in the boat and he leaves while the crowd is still present. And we know that some of those people were left still waiting to be healed. We know of other times where Jesus comes and he gathers a crowd, and instead of going out among them, he gets out on a boat and he uses the water and the sort of valley of the side of the lake as a natural amphitheater, and he preaches to the people. And then when he's done preaching, he takes the boat to the other side of the lake. That he doesn't stop and walk among them and reach and teach and touch and heal their sick. We know of the time in Capernaum where he's inside a house and it is so full that nobody can get in. And some people, their friends, figure out to dig through the roof to bring their paralyzed friend in to get healed. But how many were waiting outside, wanting healing, hoping for healing, praying for healing, and still did not get it? You see, sometimes I think we look at what Jesus does in healing, in terms of healing people, and we think about our lives and our place and our time, and we think that it is unique to living in the time after Christ that sometimes we pray for people to be healed, and they're not. We think that sometimes we ask for people to get well and they don't, and that's part of living in this modern era. But the reality is that even if we were walking around in the time of Christ and we saw him heal people, I think it would only make it more poignant if we or our loved one was the one who was not healed when others were. And so how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the fact that Jesus seems to heal some and not heal others, and he does not share with us his secret formula? He does not come to us and explain to us, well, I didn't heal that guy because he would have become a rapist if he was well. He doesn't come up to us and say, well, I healed this person because they were going to be good with their life, but I didn't heal that other person because they weren't. Because I don't think that's how it works. Jesus doesn't give us an explanation. And we think that's hard to look at when we stare into the face of sickness. It's even harder as we stare into the face of death. It's even harder as we look at the fact that here he is with this power, and yet during his time on earth, there are a handful of people that he raises from the dead. The widow's son at Nain is raised from the dead. Does that mean she was the only widow in Israel that was dependent on her son, and when he passed, she had no one to rely on? When Jesus goes and he brings Lazarus back to life, was that the only beloved follower who had a loving family that wanted him back? Obviously not. And the way it feels is it feels unfair. That we look and we see the person that was healed, and we look and we see the person that wasn't, and what we want to do as human beings is find a reason. We want to find an explanation. We want to be able to say, this is why, and if I can make sure my life is like the person who did get healed, I'll get healed too. We want to look at these situations and we want to come up with a formula that says, if only I do these things, God will keep me well. If only I do these things, then God will preserve me from death or from an untimely death, or He'll make sure I die in the preferred way I want to die many, many years from now. But God doesn't give us those assurances. God doesn't come to us and say, because you follow me, I'll make your life hunky-dory. He doesn't come along and put the little bubble of protection around us so nothing bad can happen to us. We find ourselves in a situation where we face these things, and sometimes there is healing, and sometimes there is not. And we really only get one answer. And the answer is that this same one who makes these decisions, this same Jesus who makes these choices that we don't understand, is someone who arranged things so that when the woman snuck up to him and tried to steal a little bit of healing, instead of turning around and berating her, instead of taking it away, instead of saying, look, you have no right, it says, your faith has made you well, and sends her on her way. The same one who makes these decisions is one who, when he was approached by Jairus, see, what we don't understand is the man who came to see him is one of those men who was saying, hey, this guy's nothing. This guy's not really from God. He was a synagogue ruler. He was a part of that group of people that were opposing the ministry of Jesus, that were putting him out and telling the people not to follow him. He was one of those who didn't want Jesus to be the Messiah, who didn't want Jesus to be the miracle worker. And then when it came into his house and his life and his place, and he knew that all of his ritual and all of his medicine and everything else wasn't going to cut it, he finally ran to the one who demonstrated power to heal. And Jesus, instead of saying, you know what, you're one of those guys that stood against me. Instead of saying, you know what, you don't deserve it. Instead of saying you didn't recognize God until you were so desperate you couldn't figure anything else out and you couldn't see anywhere else. He doesn't do any of that. He gets up and he crosses town. He gets up and he walks across town and he follows this man to his place. And when his faith falters and Jairus is ready to give up and let Jesus go and say there's nothing more we can do, Jesus is the one who steps in and says, don't lose heart. It's going to be all right. And he goes into this room and he makes it a secret that he heals this child. He doesn't spot it from the rooftops. He doesn't say, okay, Jairus, from now on out, you got to follow me. You got to get the other synagogue leaders online with me and get everything together. These two instances are a window into the heart of Christ. One which says he doesn't privilege people because they have power. One that says he doesn't privilege people because they've been around him for a long time. One that says that Jesus is not about finding power or strength for himself. He's not about building a following. He's not about selfishness. But this one who is God the Son understands and sees more than we do. And that somehow his decisions not to heal and not to raise people from the dead are just as true as his decisions to do so. We can trust in our heart that even though we don't like his answers sometimes, and we wish he would make a different choice, what we do know is that he doesn't say no out of a lack of love. He doesn't say no out of a lack of care or concern. And he doesn't say no because it doesn't matter. Because the same one who makes these decisions is the one that went and gave his own life on the cross for us. If he loves us enough to do that, don't you think that he loves us enough to heal all of our sickness? To raise all of those that break our hearts? That if that was the right way to do things, that he would? and that somebody loves us that much, whatever the reason might be, it's not because he doesn't care. And the other thing we know about this Jesus who makes these decisions is that he also, it's not because of what we've done. See, Jesus is really clear. When he dies on the cross, that's for everything we've done wrong. And so when we come to God, when God looks at our life, if we put our trust in him, then everything we've done wrong is covered. There is no punishment for the parts of our life that are wrong. That sickness and death, that's not what that's about. Because punishment has been covered in Christ. And for those who have not put their faith in him, that punishment is not in the here and now, it is in the hereafter. God's made that clear. And so when God says no and we're begging him for healing and for life, it's not because he's got something against us. It's not because we messed something up. It's not because he's refused to forgive. The one who died for our forgiveness is not going to withhold his power for those reasons. So what are we left with? We're left with one of those really frustrating circumstances where we have to say, I don't know. I don't get to know. I don't get to understand. And I have to trust God. I have to have faith. Not some blind faith that somehow everything's okay. But faith that the God who loved me so much, he sent his only son to die for me, somehow sees that this choice not to heal, that this choice not to raise is right. And even though I can't trace the reasoning that God makes, I can trust the hand of him who loves me more than anyone else, and more than I've ever loved anyone else. That he knows what he's doing. And this is not evidence of a lack of love, but the fullness of it. This week, there's really one thing I want you to do. And what I want you to do is, as you deal with matters of sickness and death, to turn to God first instead of last. To come to God at the beginning of feeling ill, no matter how inconsequential it may seem, instead of at the end, where you feel like there's nothing else that can be done. And as you reconcile the reality of life the way it is, instead of trying to make it okay on your own, instead of trying to find all the solutions and the explanations and the reasons on your own, to turn to Christ. And say, God, I don't get it, but I trust that you do, and you know what you're doing. During our hymn of decision, it's an opportunity to do exactly that, to make a decision.